I'm delighted to chair our first panel of the day. So this panel is made up of women who've already made the transition from the military to civilian careers, coming from across the ranks and are now representing a range of sectors and roles. So these ladies will share their own journeys and answer any questions you may have about their employers and the organisations that they're representing. As well as their transition journey as a whole. So I have a couple of questions here that have been pre-submitted before the event, but please do use the Q&A function or the chat function, ask your questions, or if you prefer, you can raise your hand and I can take you off mute. So if I could just have my panelists on the webcam, please, that would be fantastic. We can take this slide down and the audience can see everyone. Great, so we're all here. I'm going to ask you each just to introduce yourself, if that's okay, and then we'll go into questions. So, Helen, could we start with you?
Yeah, morning, Esme. Morning, everybody. So my name's Helen Smith. I left the regular army the end of November 2017 and gave myself a long weekend and then started my career, my civilian career with Skanska UK in December. They're a construction company and I started off as a project manager within the water industry. And then 2 years later, I took over as head of logistics on the Trio gas contract, and I'm about to move to another role shortly. But essentially, I spent 23 years in the regular army. I retired as a lieutenant colonel, and I really came across Skanska when I was commanding over on an exercise in Cyprus, and they came over to see how we operated, and I'll obviously answer questions as we move into the presentation.
Fantastic, thank you. Lindsay, can we go to you?
Yep, hi everyone, I'm Lindsay. I spent 13 years in the Royal Signals and I left as a corporal. I worked with the IT and communications. I served 2 tours of Afghanistan and 1 of Iraq, where I did all like the fixing the computers sort of side of things across the whole of Afghan. I left the army in April 2019, and I've nearly been with KPMG now for nearly 2 years, as of May. I am now a frontline team lead for a group of 17 plus DevOps engineers, and I am also undergoing a DevOps engineering apprenticeship as well. That's me.
Brilliant. Laura?
Oh, yeah, struggling to get off mute. So hi everyone, good morning. Laura Marsden. I'm currently a partner at PA Consulting, who are a large consulting organisation cross-industry. I left 7 years ago now. I did just over 16 years in the Royal Signals and left just after my what we call IG2 appointment, so initial appointment after ICSC. Kind of fell into management consulting, ended up in Australia and worked with PwC in Australia for a few years, and then came back to the UK, done another couple of sort of consultancy jobs before getting into cyber specifically. And now I'm the public services lead for cybersecurity in PA.
Excellent, thank you. And Natasha, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Natasha Sutherland. I left the army in June 2019 after 16 years. So I did my IRC length of commission. So I was a battery commander in the Royal Artillery, and then had a final year in the post that followed that before leaving. I didn't rush into my next post. I spent a couple months traveling around Europe. I spent 2 months in a motorhome traveling around Europe, and then I already had my job by then. And I started in the NHS as an ops manager for women's and children's at a local district general hospital. That was in October 19, and I think everyone knows what happened in February, March. So it's been a fairly busy time for the last almost 18 months. I moved up to be the general manager, so to actually run women's and children's in July 19, and have continued to work here since. So, yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. So as I said, we have some pre-submitted questions and then we'll hand over to the audience. So firstly, we had quite a few questions before this event around pitching yourself, finding your fit within an organisation. Would the panel be able to share some advice on how they found their personal fit within business, especially when looking for your first role? So how did you know what level of seniority you were suited to? Do you feel you got this right first time as well? So Natasha, are you happy if we start with you?
Yeah, more than happy. So I'd always been interested in the NHS, which is why I started looking at that. It had been one of the options I looked at before the military, so it was an easy place to look. I also admit to a slight lack of, I find it very difficult looking at all the jobs. Salary competitive felt very difficult, and I was quite drawn to the fact that you can go onto NHS jobs and they are graded on a thing that you can see. It's a very easy to understand step. I knew exactly what level I was willing to go in at, and understood that to get in and then to move up, I heard once you were in through the door, it was easy to move up. So for those who start to look at in, I went initially in as an 8A. I'm now an 8B, and my job's being regraded to an 8C. So I'm likely to have done 2 promotions within sort of 2 years, hopefully. So they're just regrading it at the moment, but that was definitely appealing. As far as the fit and how to make sure I could get that across in an interview, I made sure I went to see a lot of people before I went in. I tried to learn a bit about their language and understand how I could make my language fit. So for example, they talk a lot in the NHS about the triumvirate, which is the clinical lead, the top of the nursing chain, and the top of the management chain. So I related that to my experiences as a battery commander with the BSM, BC and BK. So it's figuring out how to find transferable elements in what you do and explain them, because our main issue is often the language when it comes to transitioning, as opposed to actually how much we can offer or understand what happens outside. It's not as different as we think it is. So
excellent. And Laura, is there anything that you would add to that?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, it is difficult to try and pitch yourself at the right level, especially when you go into something so new. What I would say is if you can get to at least talking, it's very difficult if you're applying for jobs online and trying to submit your CV. But if you can get to actually talking to somebody in the organisation, it's actually in their benefit to get you in at the right level. And you need, have a trust. We're not, the corporate world isn't. We're not all baddies. We're not trying to rip you off and underpay you and get you in at a level that's too low. Ultimately, it's beneficial for us to make you successful and get you in at the right level. So I think if you can have that conversation and trust that that someone's going to get you in at the right level, then that's great. I mean, like I said, it's difficult when you're just applying online or submitting your CV. But there's information out there. Salary banding is a great a great start. That kind of gives you a flavour of where you think you should be. Don't rightfully expect that you're going to leave the army and get 25 to 50% pay rise. It's probably not going to happen. So if that information is available, that's a good starting point. And there's plenty of people on like LinkedIn and other people who have left, sort of leavers forums who are more. I speak for myself, but I know people are more than happy to provide advice. Yeah, I mean that's what I would suggest.
Definitely, and I think now is a good point to say that the OA has a network contact list, which is a list of former officers who are out in civilian employment, and they're very happy to be contacted with your questions or your concerns. So I would really recommend using that. On to our next question then. I'm conscious we've got quite a few to get through. So lots of the audience highlighted transferring their military skills and experiences into civilian speak to be their biggest challenge. Would you be able to share some advice on how you did this and how receptive were civilian employers to your CV when job hunting? Lindsay, are you happy if we start with you?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, this is a very difficult one, if I'm honest, because it's the first time I ever had to write a CV, and I didn't know if what I was saying was military, because I've been in the military since I was 17 years old, and I didn't realize how much military I actually speak until someone, I think a year into KPMG, kept saying, "What does that mean?" I'm like, "Oh, is that not normal speak?" But I was lucky enough to get put in touch with someone that actually worked within KPMG, and I was put onto the CV interview techniques day. And you get paired up with ex-military people within KPMG. So they managed to sit down one-on-one and actually look at my CV. And then what also helped is when I was in my interview, well, I had a couple of interviews, but when I was in one of my interviews, particularly with the job that I actually got, I had someone who was ex-military sit within that room with me to kind of translate. And it was actually turned out to be quite a funny interview. And the person that was interviewing me said it was one of the best interviews she's ever had. I think it was just because it was so so completely new to her. But I would recommend, if you are applying for a job somewhere and you have a network or know someone within there, get them to take a look at your CV, because there's no one better that can look at that CV than someone that works from that company, if that makes sense. But yeah, I still look at my CV now and think, I don't really understand this because someone's kind of translated it. But what I would recommend also is, when you get to that position where you are happy with your CV, stop handing it out for people to take a look at to kind of correct it, because no matter who you pass it to, they will always find something to correct. So when you are happy, just keep it to yourself and feel confident with it as well.
Thank you. I think that's great advice. I'm going to jump to the next question, actually, Helen. I think it's going to be quite well suited to you. So we've had a couple of people in the audience who are not actively going through resettlement now, but they're already in civilian employment. So how have you found progression through your industry? And do you have any tips for approaching a promotion within your organisation, or knowing when it's time to look for a new role?
Yes, I do. And actually, I learnt quite early on that you have to look after number one. When you're in the military, you always go through that posting process, you have your reports, and you never really have to push yourself to find a job, because obviously, you know, the needs of the army or the military come first. I got itchy feet as a project manager after 2 years, and that's purely because I've been so used to moving military roles every 2 years. So I started to just look around, but didn't really know what to do. And I'm really fortunate that I had an ex-military mentor within Skanska who just took me under his wing and just kept saying, right, Helen, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And going back to what Emma was saying earlier, I looked at the job spec and I focused on the things that I couldn't do, or the things that I wasn't qualified for. And he just said, forget that. They want your ex-military skills. So I just literally applied for the job. The first one was an operations manager, and they already had someone lined up, and I felt that when I went to the interview. But then I went for another role, and it is really just looking after number one, putting yourself forward. And we're not very good at publicising ourselves. You know, we never go, hey, this is me. We don't launch ourselves into a room and talk about all the fantastic things that we can do. That's just not in our makeup. So that was quite difficult for me, because on some of my interviews, I tried not to fully focus on my military career. I tried to focus on my previous role or that current role as a project manager, thinking that's what they want to hear about. They're desperate to hear about my civilian progression. And actually quite the opposite. They were more fascinated with me as a person, with my military background and my leadership qualities. So a tip is never shy away from that military background. Never think that you have to keep that quiet in an interview, because they want you there because of your skill set. I'm currently head of logistics on a Trio gas contract. I don't know anything about the gas industry. That doesn't matter. They employed me because of my military leadership qualities and the fact that I'm a people person. You know, I've got commodities. It doesn't really matter what they are, as long as I can do the role. And that sort of spurred me on. So I'm about to go, well, I've been promoted again, and I start another role back in the water industry, but still employed by Skanska in May. And when I looked at the job spec, I thought, really, why do they want me? I can't do that. But again, I went for it. And it is all about the qualities that you have that you don't necessarily think people value, but they absolutely do. I've worked for some fantastic bosses in the military who've got emotional intelligence, and I've also now experienced that in the civilian world. But you've also got a number of civilian individuals out there. That's all from me splitting civilian military, but you do have a number of people in leadership positions who don't have those people skills, who don't have the emotional intelligence, and it's really shocking that they've managed to progress. So I think a lot of people now are looking at what we can bring to the party. It's not that civilian experience, because every day is a school day for me, both in the water industry and the gas industry, but it's what we are as a person and what our military experience has molded us into. And enables us to connect with people and communicate.
Brilliant, thank you, Laura. I can see you nodding your head there as well. Would you maybe be able to draw out a couple of the kind of key skills and qualities you feel that you bring to a leadership position?
Yeah, I think like Helen was saying, I think it can be quite eye-opening to see some senior people in civilian organisations in leadership roles, and see some let's say poor behaviours, and and not necessarily the kind of traits and characteristics that we would say make a good leader. So I mean, I think just rely on the training that you've had. I think quite often people kind of a bit confused and they say that people who are in the military are great leaders, but they're not necessarily experienced in managing people. And I think that's nonsense now. I think, it is transferable. I think my only word of caution is that, a lot of large organizations now kind of operate on a bit more of a flat structure. And I think that some military transitionees might find that a bit difficult. But in my experience, I mean, I really like the flat structure. I think it brings real diversity and strength to an organisation. So don't be afraid of it. But yeah, I mean that's what I would say.
Excellent, thank you. So we've had a question from Harriet in the audience. So does anyone have any advice on rejoining employment following a career break to look after family and finding the combination of a career transition and a return to work doubly challenging? Has anybody experienced this themselves, or any advice, even if you haven't experienced it personally?
I think a lot of businesses now, and mine included, are very focused on flexible working, and the fact that, and the pandemic has just highlighted that there are both men and women at home trying to work and trying to juggle homeschooling. So I think you'll find now, because of how the world has been over the last 12 months, everybody's much more understanding about individual needs and the flexibility around working. So, don't be overly worried about that, because, in where I've been, even if you've got people on furlough who are coming back in after a number of months, that's quite a daunting prospect as well, because work has moved on and people are coming back in. I haven't experienced it myself, but, I think with the way the world is going, there's lots of flexibility out there, and just don't be afraid.
Thank you. So this next question is specifically for you, Natasha. So somebody, anonymous, I'm afraid, has said that they also left at the 16-year point, joined the NHS. So they've been an HR manager to several maternity wards at a large city hospital, but found within a week that the NHS culture was very, very different to the military. There seemed to be a lack of comradeship and a real reluctance to change processes. After 5 months, this person left and then jumped back into the army. Do you think that perhaps this was just an experience of a particular hospital, or do you think it can be very challenging to move from the military to the NHS?
I've really, really enjoyed my transition. And although very different, because I've gone from an environment which was pretty much everyone I was commanding, in charge of, most of them were male. I think I had one female, and that's the kind of world I was in, to a very much more, particularly on the maternity side, female dominated work environment. But the fact that it's different hasn't meant that it's any less welcoming. I found that all the matrons, the head midwifery, the clinical lead is a male, but the whole atmosphere has been very, very welcoming. I think I've come into a trust at the right time, because there's a lot, and this isn't pandemic related, most of the general managers have changed. There's a real desire here, there's a real energy to make what was quite a sleepy district general hospital into, bring it forward and bring it up. So it sounds like you were at a very, very large hospital when you were working. Maybe there's something in any large institution which makes them more reticent to change. In a small district general hospital, I've found that my access to speak all the way up and all the way down is very much there. That golden thread from the ward level all the way up to board level, it is, you can almost feel it, particularly in my position, because I can go to the trust management board, bring forward the papers that I have done to change things we're doing. And yet I know all my matrons and most of my nurses from doing the walking around that, you know, that is second nature, particularly at a difficult time, to make sure people feel they can talk and communicate. So I've absolutely loved it. I have missed elements of the military as far as some of the banter, but we have a couple of other ex-military in here. So elements of that, you know, are still there. I also wouldn't, my time has been in the NHS during a time when I haven't been able to do a lot of socialising outside of work, and that has put a kilter on it. And that might not be an NHS kilter, that might be a general pandemic. But by the time it kicked off, I'd had social engagements with 3 or 4 people from work outside of work, but I'd only been here for 5 months when it started. So I would say the NHS is a really good place. I think they are trying to improve as well with the veterans bronze, silver and gold accreditation steps, and this hospital's just got its bronze and looking to move forward on the Veterans Alliance pieces of work. So to make ourselves better employers for military and ex-military and spouses, and also better providers of that service. So I've really enjoyed it, and I definitely wouldn't put anyone off, but I've already seen a few LinkedIn posts pop in, and I'm more than happy to talk to anyone who's interested and just wants to understand a bit more.
Excellent, thanks, Natasha. So Lindsay, I think we could start with you for this next question, if that's okay. So were academic qualifications a requirement in addition to your skills and experience? I know we chatted a bit about it yesterday.
This is one thing I actually worried about, because I knew that the audience was actually quite officer heavy. So I didn't know what I could actually bring to the table. Academic wise, I only have my GCSEs. I didn't do any resettlement courses. Was that because of lack of planning? No, it was because I didn't know what job I wanted to fall into. I didn't just want to go and copy everyone else and do the general Microsoft courses or the project management course, because I didn't want to kind of waste them, you know, the ELCs and stuff. So I was like, let me just hold out and hopefully, fingers crossed, something kind of happens. But the biggest thing wasn't the resettlement course for me anyway. It was networking. And this is what you always get told. It's network. I went to a few events. I went to a Barclays event. I kind of got a different vibe when I kind of went in there, and I was like, don't really feel comfortable. It was very suited and booted. It was very male orientated in one of the events that I went to, and I felt quite intimidated. So I left. Then I went to another one with a bank in New York, I think it was. And then I ended up getting put in touch with someone from KPMG. And as soon as I walked through that door in the Canary Wharf office, I knew that that's where I wanted to be. It looked like a very relaxed atmosphere. And we had that chat. And I think it's not about what qualifications you have, but what they kind of look for is, will you fit into the team? Can you adapt to what we throw at you? Which is, and I was very open to the fact that I will do anything. And you know, when they say that you're going to leave the army, you've got to may have to take a pay cut. And I wanted to aim high. I was like, why should I? Just because people are saying I need to take a pay cut, let me aim high and then I'll settle afterwards. And everything I looked at, I was like, I'm not qualified for that. I'm not qualified for that. But I ended up interviewing for 3 job roles at KPMG, and I got offered 2 of them. And then I spent a year in my first role, which was an operations support assistant manager. And then the pandemic kind of hit, and I got pulled onto the Nightingale project, where I volunteered for it, and I said I will do anything. And I accidentally fell into a project management role on there, where I did all the IT infrastructure for the Nightingale Hospital. And from the stuff that I did, because I was so used to that high pressure environment, that big massive project of just getting stuff done, they kind of saw the skills that I could, and I felt really at home doing that project as well. And that's where they really saw the true potential in me. And then they said, can you try out, can you take over the frontline team? And I was like, yes. And I haven't been happier. And the fact that they gave me that opportunity to kind of show what I was good at, which was managing people and just getting shit done, as they say. They kind of, they saw the potential in me, thought, you know what, I'm going to grab you. And for the 2 years I was there, I was on an FTC, so a fixed term contract. So I was always having to prove myself. And it was only last week that they offered me the permanent position. So I'm thrilled with that. And that was my end goal. But yeah, don't focus too much on the qualifications. You've got plenty of transferable skills that you can bring from the army. Just show that you've got that can-do attitude, that you'll take on anything. Even if you don't understand the task, just own it, like take it. There was plenty of tasks that I was given that I didn't have a clue about. But you know what, I gave it a good go. And majority of the time it really did pay off. But another thing that the civilians, like companies, do is that they tell you when you're doing a good job as well, which is really kind of reassuring. But yeah, don't focus on the qualifications, because I'm kind of proof that you don't need that stuff on paper, but they are pushing me through an apprenticeship now. So I'm doing the learning and earning, and hopefully become a DevOps engineer soon.
Excellent, thank you, and congrats on the permanent role as well. Exciting. I'm going to actually throw the question back out to our other panelists to see if they had any different experiences. So were there any qualifications that you actually found really helpful? Laura, you had your hand up there.
Yeah, it's more, it's not necessarily from my perspective, but from my journey. So I agree with what Lindsay was saying. I would just err on the side of caution a little bit. I've spoken to multiple service leavers in the last few years who try and pitch themselves at a level 2 senior, especially when we're talking about I can only really talk about sort of management consultancy. But for those who aren't really aware of how it works, the model is I sell my people to a client for a lot of money, and that client is expecting them to be an expert in that field. And what I've seen, I've spoken to, like I said, a number of service leavers and people in the transition journey over the years, and they've come to me and said, right, I want to be at this level. Oh, and I don't want to work in defence anymore. I want to work in financial services. And the conversation I have is, well, how do I justify to a client in the C-suite in the financial services that they're going to pay, let's say, £1,500 per day for you to work with them when you've got no experience of that industry? And it's only then that you can kind of see the penny drop and go, oh, yeah, okay, so maybe that's a little bit unrealistic. So I just think, I would just want people to err on the side of caution a little bit in trying to oversell themselves. Like I said, certainly in management consultancy, because it's just not how the model works.
Thanks, Helen. We'll go to you, and then Natasha, I'm not sure if you had a point to add as well. So Helen, firstly you.
Yeah, I agree with Laura. So when we're in the military, we're paid a salary according to our rank and experience, and it's always it's always difficult approaching a new and potential employer talking money. And a top tip that was given to me, and I got that I would probably have to take a slight step back, because I was coming from the military where you've always got that level of experience, to a brand new world, and certainly the water industry, I didn't know anything about it. But when I was asked about salary expectations, I merely said, I don't want to be on less than I'm on now. And actually, when they looked at the package, albeit if you look at it, you do see yourself taking a slight step backwards. The overall package brought me to there or thereabouts. But I'm so pleased I took that slight step back, because I started in project management, and completely different kettle of fish to anything I've experienced before. But what I will say is, be prepared to take that slight step back, because your skill set will come to the top. And and that's not trying to big yourself up, but just be yourself, do what you're so used to doing in terms of all the qualities we bring to the party, and you will rise to the surface. And then you've heard all of us say that we've all gained promotions, and it is achievable. But absolutely, I think, Lindsay, what you did was spectacular, and that's absolutely brilliant. I took a slight step back, but now I'm beyond what I would ever have been if I'd have stayed progressing through the army. So there are the two sides, as Laura said.
Thank you. And we had a few questions come through around whether you had to take a step back to take a step forward. But Natasha, we'll go back to you.
So I was originally going to comment on the first bit of this that was raised, which was the enhanced learning credit bit. I know we've sort of slightly moved on, but what courses and everyone did in order to be qualified. I used all of mine, and that's because once I was out, I'm not sure if I would find the time to go back and do them. And I wanted to broaden my language, make it more easy to understand on a CV. So I did things like change management. So I could say not only have I delivered lots of change in the army, but I'm a qualified change. So some of those words are useful when you're coming out. And I did a project management course as well, just so that I could say we've delivered lots of projects, but it means I can use the language that they're used to, and that I can also almost give some weight to that with the qualification. As far as the step back or step forward, I found it when I was applying, I didn't have to write a CV, but when I was applying on NHS jobs and some of the other avenues I looked into, you have to get the balance right. If you drop too much of a step back, it's very hard to undo that damage, because that's the level people see you at, because they don't understand that that was a drop back. I do think negotiation is a really important part. So although I went in at a certain grade, I was negotiated to come in at the highest level on that grade. So it's making sure people understand just how qualified you are, and that you can therefore how much you have to offer, and getting that balance right that's for you and your family. So my husband also transitioned, went down the wealth management route and all the rest of it. And we were only about 18 months out from when we each left. So he talks to a lot of people who are in the process of transitioning, and it's getting the balance right. It's the good stories and bad that are out there on exactly how to manage that. But I could only drop so far because we weren't sure how his own business was going to be developing. So it's making sure that you do what's right with your family. And if you're doing something completely and utterly different, which does require skills that you don't have, or background knowledge you don't have, I would agree. I don't need to know anything medical. Just the same as Helen doesn't need to know about water or gas. But depending on the role you go into, there may be that requirement to learn some of that ground level stuff before you go. So every role is different, and also the situation we're all in.
Thank you. That's really good advice. I'm conscious that we have run over slightly. So before I close this panel, I'm just going to ask for a last piece of advice from each of our panelists today. So maybe your top tip, or something that you recommend the audience reads or listens to, or a piece of advice for their CV, whatever it may be. Just a final word of advice before we close. So Helen, can I put you on the spot and start with you?
There we go. Yeah, just be yourself. I fell into Skanska. I didn't have a CV. I wasn't on LinkedIn, but they met me as a person, and it was me as an individual, having not seen anything about my background, qualifications and the like, that attracted them to me. So throughout it all, just be your genuine self, and your qualities will shine through.
Thank you. Lindsay, any final words from you?
Yeah, I was going to say be yourself. I think they're more interested in about your personality and whether you'll fit into the team, as opposed to the qualifications sometimes. And if someone offers you to go for a coffee, go for that coffee, because that doesn't mean we're going to chat about stuff. They're kind of trying to get a feel about whether, they could potentially offer you something. Also use your career consultant. I found that she was very, very helpful. She actually pushed me to go to events that I would never even dreamt of, especially being at my level as a corporal. You kind of get intimidated with the fact that, you're going to events about banking and finance and tax, audit and advisory. But you know what, if it wasn't for that, if it wasn't for my career consultant pushing me towards these, I would never have even looked in that route. Step outside your comfort zone, and yeah, just be yourself. That's all I can say.
Thank you. I think now's probably a good time just to give a shout out to the CTP as well as the official provider of MOD resettlement. Obviously, they have a fantastic service available to all ranks. So definitely recommend you making the most of that. So Laura, we'll go to your final word.
Yeah, I think for me, it's don't panic about finding the perfect job as your first job out of the military. It's probably not going to be perfect, and it's okay to move. It's okay to do something for a couple of years and find something else. Yeah, so just don't panic about it having to be perfect.
Thank you. And Natasha, last but definitely not least.
So my top tip would be to do with the interview. You know, we have done a huge range of amazing things, and it's just having that confidence to sell yourself and not worry. I said to myself as I went into don't say anything military with your stories. But when they're asking for an example, and the best example you think is in Afghan, well, you might have to say it a bit more softly and explain it a bit better, but there's nothing wrong with having done a huge variety of amazing things. But most importantly, do your research. It's amazing the number of interviews I still do with people and they haven't contacted in advance. They don't know what they're interviewing for. And it's just that key point. So yeah, sorry, so slightly thrown, someone came in, I am at work. So yeah, it's having that confidence when you go for those interviews and doing the research beforehand so that you know the detail. I was on the King's Fund and various other podcasts and bits and pieces to learn more about my sector. I learned about other sectors as well, but that's really important.
Excellent, thank you. Well, we will let you get back to work and I will draw this panel to a close. So thank you all again for joining us and for your insights.